Now, my family is a very, very devout family. My mother was the daughter of a Muslim missionary. So they used to call them da'is, they still do. And a da'i is someone who spends his life inviting people to Islam. My grandfather spent his life in Indonesia preaching Islam in the jungles and inviting people to accept Muhammad and the Quran and Allah as their God. And so my mother then, being the daughter of a devout Muslim missionary, when she came to the United States, was ready to raise a family that was also very devout. And so when I was born, my mom taught me how to live a devout Muslim life. It was an integral part of who we were. So what does that look like? At a very young age, I was taught many sections of the Quran. The last 7 chapters of the Quran I had memorized in Arabic by the age of 5. My mother had taught me, Nabil, you need to be prepared against Christianity. You need to know why Islam is true. And if anyone ever asks you why Islam is true, you need to be able to give them reasons to defend your Islamic faith. But you also need to be able to challenge people and show them why Christianity is false. And the first time I met a Christian who was ready with that was in college. So I've already decimated the faith of a lot of people going up to college. And then I get to college, very confident in myself, and I meet a friend. Now, this friend and I were out on a public speaking and debate tournament, and we were sharing a room together, and I saw him one night reading the Bible. And I thought, okay, this will be fun. Let's take down another Christian. It'll be amusing. And so I look at my friend, his name was David. I said, David, do you realize that book you're reading is not trustworthy? It's been corrupted over time. And he's reading his Bible, and he closes it, and he says, go on. Which should have been a sign for me that this wasn't going to go my way, but I just kept going. And I said, David, Jesus spoke Aramaic, did he not? And then the earliest church was in Palestine, it was in Jerusalem, it was in Israel, so they must have spoken Hebrew. But by the time the New Testament's written, it's written in Greek. So you have a translation of Jesus' words before it's ever written down. And then the New Testament that lasted the longest period of time in the church was not actually in Greek, it was in Latin. So you have another translation, then it's in Latin for 1,000 years before it comes into German, and from German it goes into English, and that's where we get the KJV. It's a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation, which is why you have the KJV, the NIV, the ESV, the NASV, the who knows what V. You got so many versions of the Bible, how can I know which one is actually the Word of God? Now that had worked on many Christians, and I was ready for him to crumple under the weight of my argumentation. But David looked at me and he said, Nabil, let me ask you a question. Just a few minutes ago, I heard you speaking to your mom on the phone. Was that in English? I said, no. And he said, but when you told me what she said, you told me in English. Was that a corrupted translation? No. We have in our possession over 10,000 Latin, Coptic, and Syriac translations of the early Greek New Testament manuscripts. And he said if we didn't have any of those translations, we have over 30,000 quotations of the New Testament from the early church fathers with which we can reconstruct virtually the entire New Testament many times over again. Nabil, we know with certainty the message of the original New Testament. And so from that point on, David and I start arguing about these things, but we do it in a pursuit of truth. In fact, we start arguing so much that we decide to start signing up for classes together so we can sit in the back and argue with each other the whole time. All of this time I spent with him, becoming closer to him, and in that, I knew that David would take a bullet for me. And when you can trust someone and they share the gospel with you, it makes a huge impact. So that friendship was absolutely critical in order for me to begin to hear the gospel. And it took a long time. This wasn't an overnight event. But after about a year, I came to the conclusion, all right, the New Testament manuscripts are reliable. And so I went back to David and I said, all right, David, I see that the New Testament is reliable, but I don't see Jesus claiming to be God anywhere in the New Testament. Now keep in mind, this is the biggest sticking point for Muslims. Because like I said earlier, Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Muslims believe that Jesus was the most miraculous man who ever lived. Some Muslims believe he was the only sinless prophet, truly sinless prophet who ever walked this earth. But the moment you say Jesus is God, in a Muslim's eyes, you are committing the worst blasphemy you could ever possibly commit. The Quran says very clearly, chapter 4, verse 171, as well as chapter 5, verse 72, that if you believe Jesus is God, you will go to hell. So the question for me, now that I came to the point of realization that the New Testament was reliable, I said, okay, fine. But Jesus never claims to be God in that. And now I began to study with a little bit more depth. I began to try to look at things. My friend David first handed me the Gospel of John. He said, here, read this. And as I read the Gospel of John, John chapter 1, verse 1 says that Jesus is God. Don't have to go too far. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, what is the Word? You go down to verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory. So the way I defended that was by saying, well, Jesus isn't saying He's God here. This is John, the author. I want to see Jesus say He's God. Then as you go through the Gospel of John, you see things that Jesus says, like in John chapter 8, verse 58, before Abraham was born, I am. But when someone points you to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, where God tells Moses that his name is Anohu, I am. Forget the Gospel of John. It was written too late. That's not reliable. I want to go to the first Gospel. I want to see where it was written early on. Did Jesus claim to be God? Fortunately, I don't have all the time to go into the details here, but I will tell you this. The culmination of Mark's Gospel, the very first Gospel ever written, is Mark 14:62. And in this one verse, Jesus makes 2, if not 3 references to the Old Testament, saying, I am the God of Moses, I am the God of Daniel, I am the God of David. And He does it so clearly. So Jesus claims to be God. Now imagine what this is doing to my mind, because I, as a Muslim, have now come to the conclusion that the New Testament is reliable, and in that New Testament, I'm seeing Jesus claim to be God. Paul says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. Jesus has to be God, He has to die on the cross, and then rise from the dead for Christianity to be true. But if that man then says, no, wait, watch, I will be killed, and on the 3rd day I will rise from the dead, and that's my proof for you that I am God. But as I investigated the evidence surrounding Jesus' death, I came to the conclusion that the evidence pointed uniformly to the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, there's something very profound in that, because as a Muslim, the Quran doesn't even let you believe that Jesus died on the cross. He was not killed, nor was He crucified, but so it appeared to them. The death of Jesus is the most solid fact regarding His life, historically speaking, and that alone challenges the truth of the Quran. And as a Muslim, I had to really wrestle with that. And then I have all this evidence that He actually rose from the dead. By the way, this has taken 3 years of friendship with David to get to this point, not an overnight quest. And he looks at me and he says, Nabil, well, why don't you accept the gospel then? And I said, David, it's because I'm 100% sure in Islam. Even if I'm 80 to 85% believing in the case of Christianity, the case for Islam is stronger. And he looked at me and he said, Nabil, you haven't even looked critically at the case for Islam. And he says, well, put it to the test. And here's the critical thing. He says, test it to the same degree you tested Christianity. The same level of skepticism, apply the same historical criteria. And as I began to investigate each and every single one of these claims, again, with the same critical eye that I used on Christianity, it began to crumble. Now, this is when my world fell into crisis. Because I couldn't just all of a sudden accept the gospel. If I were to do that, then I would be bringing tremendous shame upon my family. And it's not just me who's going to be looked at with shame from my family. My family, my mother and father, who spent their whole lives pouring into me, if I become a Christian, I'm bringing shame to them, and I drag their reputation through the mud, and now their lives are destroyed because of my decision. So at this point, I fell to my knees and started asking God in the daily prayers, outside of the daily prayers, I'm asking God, God, I need you to reveal yourself to me. I have looked and it looks like Islam is not true. Please forgive me for saying that. And it looks like Christianity might be true. Please forgive me for saying that. Can you tell me who you are? In this dream, I'm standing at the threshold of a narrow door. This door is just wide enough to fit me, just tall enough to fit me. And there's some depth to it, maybe 5 or 7 feet. It's made of brick, an archway kind of. And as I look into that doorway, there's a room set with a feast. Round tables, people sitting at this feast. The food has been put out, and people are in fine clothes. It's like a wedding feast, and they're about to start eating, but they haven't started yet. They're all looking that direction. They're waiting for the owner or the speaker or whoever to come and start this feast. And I want to get into that room because I know that that room is heaven, but I can't because at the other end of the doorway is my friend David. He's also sitting and waiting. He's not looking at me, but he's kind of blocking the way. I can't get past him. And so I say to him in the dream, I thought we were going to eat together. And he says, you haven't responded. And in the dream, I knew that I had to respond to David's invitation in order to get into heaven. But here's where it gets crazy. When I woke up, I called David and I asked him, what do you think this dream means? And it was the first time I heard someone's eyes roll over the phone. And he says, Nabil, this dream is so clear, I don't need to interpret it for you. Just go to the Bible. And I said, what do you mean? He says, go to Luke chapter 13. Now, David knew his scriptures, by the way, and he had given me a Bible, a study Bible. And when I turned to Luke chapter 13, it said in big, bold letters, the narrow door. Now, the moment I saw that, my heart skipped a beat, because that was the most powerful symbol in my dream. And I started reading. I'm going to paraphrase it for you, and basically here's what it says. Jesus was going through the towns and villages preaching the good news, and the disciples asked him, Lord, are many going to be saved? And he said, make every effort to enter through that narrow door. For many, I tell you, will try, and few will be able. And you will see people sitting inside at the wedding feast of heaven. Make every effort to enter before the owner comes and closes that door. But at this point, I've had 3 dreams. I have all this evidence. I have guidance from God, yet I haven't converted. And this is the reason why. As I'm driving to school, I say to God, God, I know what I need to do, but I need time to mourn. I need time to mourn. By the way, I'm just crying. I'm just losing it in the car. Not a good state to go to school in. So I go back to my apartment, and I don't know what I'm doing. So I pull out the Quran and the Bible, and I say, God, just give me comfort. And I open up the Quran, and I start reading it. For the first time in my life, I start reading the Quran, not for liturgical reasons, but for personal guidance. And as I'm looking for comfort, I realized there is not a single verse in the Quran designed to comfort a hurting man. Not one. And so I realized this book didn't even apply to my life, and I put it away. And I turned to the Bible. I said, I don't even know where to start in the Bible. I'd never gone to it for personal guidance either. I'd just gone to it to try to tear it down. And so I say, fine, I'll just start with the New Testament. Open it to Matthew chapter 1. It didn't take me long to get to Matthew chapter 5, where it says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And when I saw those words, it was like electric on the page, and it like jumped off the page and started my heart. That's what it felt like. And as I'm reading these words, I'm thinking, Jesus said that for me. Forget you guys, he said that for me 2,000 years ago. And I honestly start reading this, and every single verse I start reading, I begin to feel like I'm having a conversation with the Bible. And I finally get to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 says, he who proclaims me before the people of this world, I will proclaim before my Father in heaven. And he who denies me before the people of this world, I will deny before my Father in heaven. See, I had all the evidence that I needed. I had all the spiritual guidance I had asked for, and now I had emotional comfort through the Word, knowing it was the Word of God, but I hadn't proclaimed. I looked at God and I said, God, if I do this though, I have to give up my family. Matthew chapter 10's next verses, you want to know what they are? He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. As I read that, I said, God, it's not just my parents though. It's my whole life. The next verses say, He who is not willing to pick up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Yeah, God knows the cost. The cost that Muslims have to pay today, the cost that you might have to pay if you're listening to this, is not a new cost. It's the cost the disciples had to pay from the very beginning. It's the cost we all must be ready to pay if we're going to follow Jesus. And so I got on my knees and I prayed something. No one had told me about the sinner's prayer. I prayed something that sounded very Muslim, but I did say, Lord, I believe you are Jesus, and I submit to you. And I thank you for having taken my sins, died on the cross, and risen from the dead. I want to follow you with my life. When I saw my father cry for the first time in my life, my father was a 24-year veteran of the U.S. Navy. To me, he was like my archetype of strength. He was like my Superman. And here's what he said to me, and this is all he said. Nabil, today I feel as if my backbone has been ripped out from inside me. And my mother didn't say a word. It was like there was a light that had been in her eyes up until that day, and I just turned it off. And I walked outside. By the way, I had been crying all night, so this is the next morning. I walk outside, and I know this sounds cliche, but it's true. Everything looked different. Everything looked different. It was the same apartment, the same tree, the same street, but it all looked different. And the one thing that looked the most different was when I saw someone walking across the street. I'd seen that millions of times before, but for the first time, I realized that's not just someone, that's someone that God was willing to die for. And in that moment, I realized what the gospel was. The gospel is not something that you just hear and believe. If it doesn't change your life, it hasn't hit you yet. And in that moment, I realized that this God is worth everything. This story is worth sharing with our lives. Oh, and our lives are in His hands. And if we die today, we're going to be taken care of. But there are millions, in fact, billions of people for whom that is not the case. And if we lived every second of our lives for their sakes, only then would we truly honor this God who is willing to live the life we should have lived, to die the death that we should have died. That's our God. And that's my story.